This is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad yourself?
Doing great, man. You know what? There's so many great things about having started this podcast with you. This part has nothing to do with you, though. It's all the other people that have come onto the show, like our guest today. And I have to share my favorite story. It's I don't think I ever said to Heather, hey, this is a great moment, but I saw her at the Gartner conference this past December, and she was actually knitting. And she talked on one of our previous episodes about that being a major hobby. And I have to say that was the first time I've gone to a conference and saw someone knitting.
Okay, well, I don't know how we're going to top that. That's this great moment in Heather history or something like that.
It's just seeing somebody in their element, man. I love that. But I also felt completely comfortable, oh, there's Heather. I'm going to go over there and chat with her and hopefully not break her groove on this big knit that she's working on. But I need to know, is she making Christmas stocking or what is in process here? I wonder if she remembers that moment and if she knows what she was knitting.
Well, there's a good and a bad, right? It's good if she remembers because it's it was a memorable experience meeting Jim, which, let's be honest, it's always a memorable experience meeting Jim, especially at a conference because you just don't know what you're going to be wearing. It could also be bad if you made her mess up something. She's there's that guy who made me, mess up this stitch and I had to go back and redo blah, blah, blah. So let's find, you know what? Let's just jump right to it. Let's find out. Heather, was it a good or bad experience when Jim came up to you when you were knitting?
Good news, and I have bad news. I know exactly what I was knitting because it is my current travel project, and I've been working on it for a while. I was knitting a shawl. I'm still knitting that shawl. I will probably be continuing to knit that shawl for at least another 6 months to a year at the rate that it's going. Which means I've actually spoken to a lot of people while I've been knitting that shawl, and I don't remember any particular one conversation that I had. But if I'm knitting, I'm always happy to chat because I'm either doing something that's completely mindless and I just have to make my hands twitch for a little bit, or I put it down.
It's what's it, the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants? It's this one is the traveling shawl, and every stitch or knit in it has some sort of story behind it. It's I did that when I was talking to Jim, and he had, I don't know, it was Gartner, right? So it's probably a cowboy hat, maybe, or maybe you were dressed like a dealer, one of those outfits.
Exactly. No, it was in Texas, so it was definitely cowboy hat.
And so maybe there's a little bit of a jingle jangle in those bells on that shawl for that particular part of the shawl.
Or maybe it really got tightly woven or something.
No, well, people have said that they can tell what my mood is by how aggressively I'm knitting. If I'm just sitting there knitting slowly, and then the more irritated I get, the faster it goes. And then the drastic slowdown, and then the really bad sign when I just put it down and I just start looking at you. But with the death stare of, you did not just say that.
I've been fortunate enough I don't think I've seen the death stare because you're always, warm and inviting and approachable and, definitely one of the folks that I enjoy seeing at conferences. And, hopefully I will know, that I have worn out my welcome far before I get the death stare to say, okay, move along. I got some stuff to do.
I think the death stares only actually happened in certain standards conversations.
Do you think death stares can be sniper accuracy, meaning only one person sees it? Or do you think it's a shotgun where if you let loose your death stare, does everyone see it?
It's one of those things where not everybody recognizes that's what I'm doing, but my closest friends always do. And so for them, it's more laser eyes have come out and they just start slowly trying to hide.
Or it's like Jim from The Office where you just get the eyes and what was that about?
Whether the person that I'm talking to actually gets it.
Well, maybe I might just use some video editing and just have everyone be really wide-eyed this entire episode and see if people catch on with that one. Let's see. Heather, this is your 5th time on the show. We did the math right before the show. So kind of an exclusive club for us to be on the 5 times. So Jim is in charge of jackets, so I'll leave it to him. Jim, I don't know what your plan is, for 5-timers club, but I feel like we need to start handing something out. Maybe a T-shirt or something.
If we celebrate 5 times right now, Andrew Shikiar is going to give me the death stare because I gave him nothing for his 10th appearance, which was a major faux pas because he gave me grief. And it was it was deserved. Yeah.
Every time I've been on the show, I've been wearing a different hat because you've been asking me like different questions about, in one thing, it's like, okay, talk about your standards work. But then in another thing, it was talk about your ID Pro work. And then another thing is talk about your collaborative work with, and writing this, the DADE paper. So you've always taken like this slice of what it is that I do.
And now we're just going to talk about all of it. And I think, did we lose Mercy behind you?
We did.
Okay. Well, maybe Mercy will make an appearance of ID Pro newsletter fame and ID Pro videos. I always enjoy seeing her behind the scenes. So maybe we'll be lucky. Maybe she will come back and grace us with her presence. But why don't we start with sort of the world of Heather? When I look at all the stuff you've worked on and have been working on and continue to work on, give us an update. Like what is new, what is old, and what is as is from your perspective?
Well, so this year has been really interesting. At the end of last year, I knew I was wrapping up my ID Pro work. I've been working with ID Pro for about 6 years, and I felt that it needed new energy to sort of spice it up. And everything else I was doing had kind of moved on from that type of model. So knew that was ending. And so I actually worked on a business plan, the Heather business plan. I'm not sharing this with anybody. It's what is it that I want to do? And I came up with such a pretty plan. It was marvelous. It was great. It was wonderful. It's like, I'm going to focus a lot more on the identity salon. I'm going to travel less. I've got some basic standards work that I'm going to be taking care of. And we'll see how that goes, where I actually leave myself a lot of time to focus on some of the things that I think are just downright interesting. And that lasted till about January 7th. And then it kind of all blew up because the Identiverse conference hit a very, very sad state of affairs in that the person who was taking over from Andy and I to basically manage content passed away. Very unexpectedly at the end of the year. And it left the conference in a very, very difficult position of there was no one that could backfill at CRA to do this. And so Andy and I both said, right, dust off those gloves, dive, onto that grenade we went. And I picked up the role of content chair before I was chief of staff for the conference chair. He was doing the majority of the work, and I was just like randomly catching anything that needed to be caught. This year, I'm much more actively engaged in actually the content development for what comes in for the CFP, the sponsorships, the side meetings, a lot more hands-on material, and trying to make it so that the conference chair can actually keep that larger oversight role. So that's been a character building experience, trying to pick that up with no, I don't want to say no planning, but it's not what I expected to be doing. And so there was a lot of last minute fire drill type things. And in the meantime, right, I was like, okay, that's cool. And then the World Wide Web Consortium's team said, hey, Heather, could you volunteer for 2 years for the technical architecture group? Which is a wonderful, big responsibility. And I had to find people to help support that. That was fun too. The technical architecture group, the TAG, it's an 11-person group. 8 people are elected, and then the team says, all right, what's missing? What do we need that will balance out the membership of this so that we can actually look at the architecture of the whole World Wide Web? And that's when they reached out to me and said, yeah, I think you're doing so much with the identity space, with other standards organizations, with policymakers. So they asked me to be on the TAG. Okay, that's cool. Didn't expect to do that. The Identity Salon, it is doing great and wonderful things. But even our first meeting, instead of having it was a full day, yes, and we generate reports out of all these meetings, and that's something that I take care of because I do like the writing. And in this case, our reports are usually around 20, 25 pages. Except this was such a great meeting, it turned into 40 pages. So that was a big thing that I got to work on too. And in the meantime, I'm still supporting the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology and the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, NIST and the NCCOE. I subcontract through MITRE as a subject matter expert and a technical editor for a lot of the stuff that comes through there. I'm also working as an advisor to something called the SIROS Foundation, which is it's a nonprofit in Sweden that's focusing on an open source wallet platform that actually works more on a desktop rather than a mobile device. I'm sure we'll get to the mobile device, but it's trying to look at where things are when you're not on mobile and how you handle that, and when you don't want to be stuck with perhaps a big tech wallet. There's a lot of interesting things going on there, and that's a pretty hot topic in Europe. And there's probably more. Oh, yeah. Part two. But that's probably I'm gonna stop there as those are the highlights at this point.
Okay, so yeah, you wear many, many, many hats.
Yes, and I still write a lot for my own blog, and because that wasn't enough work, I decided to add an audio blog component to it. Because thank you. As it turns out, a lot of people don't feel they have time to read.
Or can't. We don't judge.
It's our success.
What, not being able to read?
Yeah, not wanting to read. Well, I mean, people drive too.
Yeah, it's when they drive, it's when they're, walking to work, it's when they're doing dishes, it's when, any number of things. And one of the things that I know personally, I like the give me 10, 15 minutes because that's all I have time for. I'm going to take a walk at, 30 minutes max. So for having my podcast be generally never more than 15 minutes long, because it's sort of the TLDR of what did I just write about? Here, let me talk about that. If you're interested in more and you actually want to click on all the research, because all of the blog posts are always written first, and they always have the links to the research material that went into it. If you want that, go look at the post.
So where do people find the podcasts? Sphericalcowconsulting.com, I know has links to it, but I assume, it's on all the major ones. I listen to it on Spotify.
Yeah, it is on, I think every major and minor podcast platform there is. It's called a Digital Identity Digest.
It's fun, right?
I get a kick out of doing it, sure. One of the things I've noticed, looking behind the scenes at like stats of reading and podcasts and whatnot. So, the readership has definitely gone down a little bit at just about the same rate that the podcast has gone up.
Mm-hmm. You're just trading one for the other.
In some cases, yeah. I think there's a lot of people who are getting the material now just directly from the podcast rather than going to the blog itself.
Yeah, I think we see some of that too with us doing video. The vast majority, like 99%, still listen, but we have the video component, and people want to enjoy it that way, great. Or not enjoy it that way, that's fine too. You've been involved with so many different things, and you named a couple things. I want to make sure that I get them out. Identity Salon, for people who are not familiar with that, what is the Identity Salon?
So the Identity Salon was an answer to a problem that Ian Glazer, Andy Hindle, and I noticed, which is that a lot of the senior architects that we would talk to at these conferences, of course, we talked to them in the hallways, and they really wanted to be, they appreciated the large venue and all the people that wanted to talk to them, but they really wanted to have some quiet time so they could talk to each other, where they didn't have to spell out necessarily all the acronyms, and they could actually talk a little bit about what's happening in my company and how does it compare to what's happening in your company, but do it in a fairly relatively private manner. And so we kicked off the Identity Salon, which is a small invitation only event. In part, half of it I would say is the event, where we never have more than 30 people. It's covered under Chatham House rules. And there may or may not even be slides for any given event where we just sit down and say, okay, what are the problems we're having? The most recent one was around identity proofing and verification in the enterprise. What changes are we seeing? How are enterprises adapting to the different technologies out there? How are they experiencing challenges? And we tend to look like that bigger scale, longer range problems. And then out of all of those, we create these reports. And we realized we initially thought that people would, come to the event and that's how they would get the value. But then more and more people actually wanted the reports. And so we turned the report part into a subscription service so people could subscribe for $200 a year and then get all the reports that we've done.
Heather, I mostly follow you. I mean, obviously we see each other at conferences, but I mostly follow your LinkedIn. And one thing I've noticed that one of the things I think is unique about you is kind of the way you bring up these topics. Not like, hey guys, by the way, I'm now 100% on a topic and I'd like to just give you the answer. You're exploring, you're thinking about it, more kind of thinking out loud. I wouldn't call it a stream of conscious, but at the same time, you kind of bring up these topics and hey, I'm figuring this out as well. And you've been talking a lot about kind of AI agent identity, and obviously everybody's talking about that, but you're kind of putting it in the terms of, okay, how's it going to work as AI agents start acting on our behalf, which I think is an incredibly useful topic. I think more and more over the next couple of years, this is going to take over how we do authentication, for example. And the perspective I'm coming with that is that I think apps are all going to be written to tell the app maybe they won't even be called apps anymore, but you'll essentially be telling an agent, go do this thing for me, go make a purchase or submit a timesheet or do all these things. And then the agent's going to go out there and be the actor that authenticates. And so I'd like you to kind of talk about what your exploration is and kind of what are some of the big topics as far as you're concerned.
So the reason I find the AI space so interesting right now is because nobody has good answers to it. I mean, what we see more often than not is, yes, I have the solution, as if there's only going to be one, which is not going to be the case. There's never just one solution to anything, right? That's just not how it works. The reason I write and research the way I do, to be honest, is because I'm trying to build myself a library of material of how does this actually work, and what are the resources that are the right ones to look at in order to actually deep dive into this in a sane manner. And other people tend to find that useful. Since I'm not actually a vendor and I'm not trying to sell anything, it's actually really helpful for me to just say, here's where we are right now based on this information. And if that spurs other people to actually then think a little bit more critically about it, then that's fantastic. I did something interesting for RSA. So I was just really curious how this might work. If you go to the RSA conference website and you say, show me your vendors, it gives you these pre-selected keyword terms. And so you can say, show me the people who say that they are AI vendors. It's
Only 8? I'm okay, sure.
There were 49 of them, which was actually less than I expected, that self-identified as AI vendors. I imagine if you went through others, they would say, no, my products are AI supported, but they didn't see themselves as AI vendors. I'm all right, well, for AI vendors out there, what is it you do, and how do you break down that kind of classification? And what was so much fun about doing all of that is, of course, it ended up splitting into layers. There was the identity layer, but then there was a policy layer, there was a runtime and visibility, there was applications and code security, and then it went all the way up to the hardware edge of things. It was an incredibly uneven distribution in terms of, we did not, looking at all of that, there was a group of them over here and a group of them over there, and then all these big gaps, and nothing actually orchestrating between all of those layers. if that's the way the industry is right now, how anybody can say that they have the answer to life, the universe, and everything is just beyond me. I don't know how they can get away with it and look at themselves in the mirror the next day.
I keep pointing back as my use case or my example of how I see this working is there was a commercial that was running around the time of the Super Bowl, and it was the person was saying, okay, go out and buy me an espresso machine. And the AI came back, or the app came back and said, okay, it's $300. Okay, go ahead and buy it. And then transfer money from my savings account into my checking account. Okay, great. And then I was thinking, behind the scenes, this agent is going in and authenticating as the person, especially with the banking app. And if I think about my banking app experience, the first thing it does is like, make sure you're not a robot. Okay, that's number one. Let's assume we can get past that, or maybe we don't assume. That's a topic. But number two topic is there's got to be some kind of MFA. And I don't think we've solved for that. But even my question number one is like, authentication seems to be kind of a challenge in this aspect.
You know who was kind of prescient in all of this was Ian Glazer, Sean O'Dell, Andrew, the folks that were focused on the whole continuous identity effort, because I think the whole concept of authentication is kind of not what we think it is anymore. It's not a one and done. And if it's not a one and done, then what are you doing, right? You keep having to redo this thing in order to get this whole chain of events to happen. I don't think authentication's the right word. I don't think that's the action that's being taken.
What is it then? Do you know? I mean, I agree with your premise. And then the question becomes like, so is this a vendor's going to solve for this and run with it and say, we have the only product that works this way, or are there going to be...
They can't. There has to be. Well, now we're getting into the really hardcore, this is where I live part, right? I mean, what's happening is vendors are trying to say, if you orchestrate all your stuff through my platform, then it will all just work. That is not how interoperability actually happens. Which means that for interoperability to happen, there actually has to be standards that you can use that have consensus. And no, publishing your idea on your website and say, I've written a standard for the following behavior is not actually a standard. I've seen that a couple times recently, and I'm like, all right, wait, back up. Let's talk about what standards are. So glad you made it openly available because you put it on your website, but that is neither necessary nor sufficient. Yeah. Well, it's still proprietary. It still hasn't gone through actual community review. It hasn't gone through any privacy considerations. It hasn't got a security consideration. Depending on what layer you're working at, it doesn't have people looking at the usability of it. It doesn't have people looking at the internationalization components of it, all of which actually matter.
So this whole topic that we're talking about, do you see this? I mean, it's going to take cooperation from vendors to build these things. Who drives a standard like that? Is that community member? I don't know. I'm using like vagaries to talk about it, but I'm like, is this like Apple and Microsoft?
So kinda. I think the whole looking at MCP is a really interesting example of how all of this works. And for the life of me, I'm blanking on the name of that new standards organization. What I'm seeing happening is the industry players, the big industry players, who generally get in trouble with regulators if they don't have interoperable solutions based on open standards. They're getting together to say, okay, this is not working. We have to develop something. And MCP is going down that path. But what that ends up being is a very heavily pay-to-play style of standard, which can work. The FIDO Alliance, if you think about it, is a pay-to-play for participation. And yet they have open standards that come out of it, and the royalty-free licensing, which is kind of important. I mean, open standard can mean any number of different things depending on what's most important to you. Are you most worried about how the standard was developed? Are you most worried about how the standard is made available? your mileage varies.
It's kind of like open source from that perspective. I mean, it can mean a lot of different things. You can have open source software and still make a fortune around an open source project. What is the standards body that, is most important when it comes to kind of this whole agentic AI and the standards that are going to be developed around that? Is it W3C?
No, no. This stuff is happening at so many layers. I can't say that there's any one standards organization that's more or less important. The IETF has a lot of really interesting work going on right now. For example, um, there's a working group that's working on AI preferences. How do you actually rebuild robots.txt to give it instructions for what you do and don't allow for LLMs to use your material or not? That working group has been going for about a year now, and it's fascinating to watch it because I've never seen an IETF working group with so many lawyers involved, but they're all there in the room. There's also something called WebBot Auth, the WebBot Authentication group, trying to figure out how do you, on the one hand, there's a lot of people and organizations that desperately want these bots to authenticate themselves so that they can put some controls around what they do. But the incentive mismatch means that, well, you can want that. You can also want a pony, and you can want it to have a nice little horn in the center of its head. And, you want it can fart rainbows. You can want anything, but the incentive to get it, why would a bot actually do this? What are you offering them other than rate limiting what they can do? Well, that's not an incentive, or give them access to more things, maybe. That plus the ongoing work with OAuth and the various extensions, I would call them, of the OAuth spec to help with the authorization and delegation. That's a pretty big deal. As soon as you do get to the acting on behalf of users, and then I would have to say, yeah, the W3C is actually a really interesting place to see what that means. The post I wrote recently on AI-enabled browsers, where the browser becomes your AI agent. Oh, that's fascinating because that the way the web architecture thinks of user agents doesn't account for that level of delegation and behavior, and so they're having to really think about some of the web architecture, what that means when you hit a button. Who's you? Who is you hitting the button, and what kind of response should you be getting, and what principles then apply?
But also, how do you define a AI-based browser? Is it the browser itself? Is it a plugin to the browser? I mean, Claude has plugins and AI browsers and downloadable apps. Now, I like Claude. I think it works, pretty well. But who makes that definition of what is an AI browser?
And I'm sorry that we're differentiating them this way, calling them AI browsers as opposed to regular browsers. That's a very artificial distinction that's not going to last through the end of the year.
It sounds like marketing, right? You log. It's I'm going to shame Microsoft here, but everything is Copilot now at Microsoft because they're trying to get AI into everything. And so if I go into an app store, it's like Copilot for Windows Word, right? Copilot for Excel. Like no. Like I just need Excel.
The number of times I've yelled at my computer, "Stop helping me! Stop it!" But it, yes, who actually decides that? Well, the decision has probably been made. We're just working through marketing terms right now.
I wonder how involved kind of the frontier model companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google would be in this authentication standards, or are they just kind of like sitting back, and are they going to be active participants, or is that too soon to say?
So I would say they are not particularly incented to work at the what I'll call a traditional standards model. The thing I like most about the open standards development of the IETF, the W3C, the OpenID Foundation, even the FIDO Alliance, is that you are ultimately demanding consensus of people. The humans have to come to consensus on what's going in that spec. And consensus is slow. And the more people you involve, the slower it is. There's really good reasons for that, and it makes for a much more powerful specification at the end of the day that you know you have buy-in for because you have fought to get your agreement, but it is slow. And the companies like Anthropic and OpenAI and whatnot, they're going, yeah, no, that's too slow. AI doesn't work that at that speed. We've got to move it faster. And if you're telling me that I have to wait for the IETF to figure out the kind of authorization models that I need, I'm just going to invent my own and assume that my market dominance will make it work.
Is it hopeless though? Like a governance body will never be able to keep up with the speed of business, right? Whether it's federal, state, local, or even just a standards group, it just won't be able to keep up.
I think there is a compromise. There's a gentleman who, like, some people like to follow me for reading and stuff, which is great, but I follow a guy named Mark Nottingham, and he's a fantastic blogger. And one of the things he's written recently is about how can you use AI in standards development and to, where can we use it to help speed up the process while still respecting the need for human consensus and human engagement. But one of the things that every standards process desperately needs is implementation. Just to test out. I mean, I could write the most glorious standard in the world, but if you can't actually use it, what was the point? But if you can write it and then just feed the spec to an AI and say, can you write code based on this that would actually work? You've sped things up actually quite a bit. So I think there's a middle ground. Not sure everybody is comfortable getting to that middle ground just yet because we've got enough people in the standards development that are like, wait, all AI is bad because it uses M dashes too much, which I think is just rude. I like M dashes. Thank you very much. And others that are like, oh, why are we not just having AI write this stuff? I could just brain dump and then it'll come up with something and it'll be great. So there's a lot of tension in the space and it will resolve, but for now it's messy.
Well, why don't we relieve some of that tension and go to maybe a topic that is less controversial, like national digital identity programs.
Oh, sure.
In the US here, right, we've got mobile driver's license. We've got, mobile passports now. You can do that through Apple.
No. Yes, no. Don't call it that. No, don't call it that because it's a derived credential. It's not actually your passport. You can't use it anywhere except with USTSA.
Tell me I'm talking to a standards person without telling me I'm talking to a standards person. You're absolutely right. So let's talk about sort of those programs and, what are some of the things that you've been observing, either from like a regulation standpoint or from other programs maybe you've had your eye on. What are some of the policies that you see coming up that are really going to shape and impact the way that identity architecture works for these types of credentials?
There's been some really interesting policy battles around when and how to use selective disclosure versus when and how to use zero knowledge proofs. Or do you use both? Or do you how does all of that work and when do you use it? And who are you using it with? Because some of these things require pretty powerful smartphones. And that is its own inclusion problem because not everybody is going to have said smartphone. I have had some wonderful conversations over adult beverages with a friend of mine about looking not just in the US but to Europe, where there's this the push for getting this kind of cryptographically verifiable credential out there. Like, okay, the governments are pushing it. They're going to issue these things, and they're going to issue it into wallets that are only been certified. And we've got standards, we've got specs, we've got rules. Who's actually going to use it? The relying party aspect of this, of, okay, they're setting up all of this infrastructure, but they don't have the relying parties actually sorted out with, do they know how to use these credentials, how to check whether this particular, is it a screenshot? Is it a QR code that's safe to click on? What are they supposed to do? That's the other thing I see that's happening a lot. We're coming up with some great rules and guidelines and policies and have left the poor relying party of the entities having to use this stuff completely out in the cold.
Is this a situation where you kind of have to build it first and then kind of have that framework in place for people to catch on versus the hope that it catches up? And maybe this is a poor analogy, but it's almost kind of like electrical charging infrastructure for EVs. I want a vehicle that, I want to be able to take my EV anywhere across the US and have a network that is stable, reliable, and I can count on for that trip. That does not exist yet today in the US. As a 6 or 7 year now EV driver, I'm very familiar with how things work in that space, but it's continuing to get better. And the better the adoption of like an EV charging network, the more people are to get over the things like range anxiety and, all the different things that go along with that. Is it similar for a credential where we need to have infrastructure built up to support it and be ready to accept those people when they are ready to come on board?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's what they're counting on, the need for government services to do that. I know there's people are slowly leaning against financial services in the hopes and expectations that financial services will start using these more regularly, in the US in particular. There's been some interesting work out of NCCOE when they talk about mobile driver's licenses that are specifically geared towards financial institutions and why a financial institution would actually find this a better solution than the physical driver's license.
Can you explain that? You've got my head cocked to the side. I'm like, what?
Yeah. The So right now, a lot of the banks, we'll just point at banks. Banks are like, no, if you want to open up an account, you have to, we want you to come in. We want you to have your ID. We want these things because we have regulations that we have to comply with in terms of know your customer. And the point is that like the NCCOE and NIST are trying to say, yes, you can actually do all of that with the mobile driver's license. And walking them through that, they're, for legal reasons, they are incredibly risk averse organizations out there. But that will be, I think, after the government services, this becomes a thing. Financial services will become the next thing, and possibly an even better thing than government services will be. Government services still have to be. They still have to make it possible for people who don't have these things to get to the services that they need. And unfortunately, a lot of the people who need the services more are the ones least likely to have the digital credentials. Banking, I think you start to see that even out a little bit more, where more kids don't need government services for the most part in the same way that kids are getting bank accounts opened for them. So I think the banks will be the next big thing. And then maybe the universities or colleges or even K through 12, depending on how that's going to work. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about K through 12 because I stuck with cats. I don't have kids.
I think one of the mistakes that I've made a lot is thinking of, okay, when we're talking about digital driver's license or digital IDs in general, is just the idea of like, hey, let's take the real world use case and how am I going to use a passport or a driver's license in the TSA line or when I get stopped by the police. But there's a whole lot of use cases that are purely digital. I think opening a bank account could be a purely digital experience. And I think that's probably level 1 use case, right?
Yep. And I bet you if we sit and brainstorm a bit, we'll find other level 1 use cases as well that voting could actually be an interesting one, though that goes back to government services. Still may depend a little bit on what you're voting for. It doesn't have to be in a government election. It can be in like your community elections or things like that, where really they don't actually care how old you are per se, but they want, or do you actually live in Seattle? That's all they really want to know.
No one actually cares about the outcome of the election because you see the voter turnout so small. But if you tried to have online voting, people would blow a gasket.
In some of the local cases, sure. Here where I live, since I'm in unincorporated King County, what we're voting on is like, it's a fundraising activity. So that's why we tend to get like dogs and goats as mayors.
I mean, I might support any of those things for mayor, depending on the dog and or goat. If it's little Sebastian, I'm all in. I want to, we've taken a lot of time kind of talking about a bunch of different topics, but I want to look at this idea of, digital identity, especially for national programs, whether it is government or maybe finance or something that has that. If I'm an identity architect out there listening to this, and I'm probably sitting in a private organization, what do I do about this? Is there anything that I can do, or is it more, let me keep an eye on these standards and sort of be ready for my organization to latch onto that when it's ready to go for like a private org?
Any enterprise out there that has to deal with I-9 forms, those forms that say, in the U.S., is this person legal to work here? They could save so much time using digital credentials. So much time, where that as we move to digital credentials to identify the person, but also digital credentials to verify their educational experience, right? Think how long it takes to actually send all of that through HR and do all the checks. That right there, if you do nothing else at this point in time, if you can move that to a purely digital verification model, you have saved your company time and money, and you're probably going to get better outcomes.
So when we talk about moving to digital identity and credentials like that, what I don't think we're talking about is like this immediate cutover where you cannot go the traditional route, right? There's going to be this maybe years long transition point where, hey, we support, digital credentials. If you've got them, great. If you don't, here's the other path for you to follow. This is not necessarily like a binary, today it's this and tomorrow it's that, right? There's going to be probably, I'm thinking, a multi-year transition here. And who knows? We may never get to like 100% digital credential, but if we got to 50% over the next decade or 2 decades, however long it takes, and then longer and longer, like I guess sometimes I feel like it gets lost that it's like, hey, we're talking about digital credentials and like this is a 100% game. Like it has to be all or nothing, but it doesn't, right?
One of the sessions I was at RSA was a gentleman named Dale Bowie. It was a super fun session. And he was reporting out from Australia. And one of the things that he showed on the screen was if you don't have a digital credential, or you don't necessarily have if you don't have a photo ID, they have actually this form, and they have the different types of IDs rated. And you can actually prove your identity without a single photo ID at all, as long as you can make the documentation add up to 100. Now, like a passport would be, 99 points, but other things like your electric bills might be 10 points. Your library card might be another 10 points. This other thing might be another 10 points, right? You could actually prove who you are using a predetermined list of things that I thought that was actually a really great list and a great way to do it.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. I think as long as you don't have too many, you also have to figure out is like somebody out there is going to try to figure out how to break it. And so you have to kind of have that right mindset going in. I wanted to ask you one more question. You've been so generous with your time. I'm kind of thinking like from a future perspective, like we seem to be talking about a lot of the same topics right now, especially like agentic AI and machine identities and things like that. Um, I guess the question I'd ask you is like, what are we going to wish we talked more about and thought more about 5 years down the road?
I'm going to point to something that we have started talking about, and yet my observation with how those conversations have gone have been like, wow, that's really, that's, yeah, that, and off they go, right? And that's the whole digital estate thing. Because that problem's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over time as more and more people have a much bigger digital footprint out there. How did we end up handling delegation? AI is making delegation a super hot topic. But now we're like, okay, well, how do we solve it for AI? I'm like, yes, and we still need to solve it for people.
You're talking death in the digital estate?
Death in the digital estate, yeah.
It's funny. Jeff and I had a conversation about this the other day because one of us asked, like, well, what if one of us dies? And it's like, okay, let's stop talking about that and start talking about something else. Kick the can down the road. And it's like, We know that you need to plan for this, but
it's a deeply uncomfortable thing. It's a deeply uncomfortable thing to do. You know, when I was a kid, I didn't even realize that I was missing the topic of, you're not supposed, in polite conversation, you're not supposed to talk about sex, money, politics, or religion. It never occurred to me that death was one of those things that you just don't talk about it. But as soon as you bring it up, it's deeply uncomfortable. And yet I think in that 5 years' time, it's a problem that will only get bigger.
Well, you've just ruled out like 95% of my conversation. So I guess I've never had really a polite conversation.
Well, I pretty much gave on polite conversation too. So,
So speaking of death of digital state, how do people get involved? I know you're part of that with Dean Sachs and Mike Kaiser, but for people who are interested, is it joining the group and sort of following on and listening? Is there something that people can actively be doing around this?
Yes. I mean, if you want to participate and have conversations about it, sure, then participating in the community group might be a fine and dandy thing. But I suspect a lot of people, they just tell me what to do. They don't necessarily, want to have a conversation about all of the details and whether anything was missed on the list. But if you go to, and I'll make sure you have a link for the show notes. If you go to the OpenID Foundation's website, you'll actually find, yes, we wrote a whole paper, but there's also actually a checklist guide. And I think that guide is maybe ultimately more practical than the paper will be. The paper is more for policymakers, standards developers, things like that. Anyone who's intellectually, academically interested in the space. But that the actual guide to hand out and say, yeah, you're not going to want to do this, do it anyway. That would be the more useful thing.
Yeah, if you can send a link over. I mean, I have the OpenID webpage already for our show notes, but if you have a direct link to said checklist, that would be very appreciated. You've been super generous with your time, and so we want to wrap up things up on a lighter note. I feel like this conversation kind of went a few different ways, and it got, I don't know, maybe it was just me. It was kind of okay, it's getting kind of uncomfortable, but not in a bad way. It was we really kind of need to talk about more of this stuff. And so maybe this is not a great lighter note, but in honor of Identity Management Day, which is coming up in about a week or so, by the time this drops, I'd like to have a theme song for Identity Management Day 2026. You can pick any song you want, and that will become the theme for that day. That will have, people's earworms going or toe tapping or just, laughing ironically at the song choice. And so, Heather, as our guest, you get to go first, or you can defer to one of us if you prefer and want some more time to think about it.
I'm going to go with Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries.
Okay. And for copyright protections, I can't play any of that music, so you just have to think about it in your head.
Actually, you probably could, because that music's been around for a really long time.
Yeah. Well, if you want to hum a few bars, we could get away with that.
You don't want me to do that?
Jim, do you have a theme song for Identity Management Day?
I do. I wanted to give a shout out before the episode wraps up. Eve Miller is dropping her book in about a month. It's called Mastering Digital Identity. Eve is a huge friend of the show, huge friend of all three of us as individuals. I've already gotten to read a clip of the book, and it is freaking awesome.
Same. High quality reading.
Yeah, I just need the audio version. No, I did read. I broke out those reading specs just for that. So, Jeff, my approach to answering this question, and I didn't know this was the question until about 45 minutes ago.
That's how I roll. I want it to be a gut reaction as much as I can.
Yeah, well, I thought we had to have the term center in the title of the song. And so there are very few songs that AI came back with that have center. Probably missed some obvious choices, but the one that I knew was from the Jay Giles Band, which I think they only had one song that anybody's ever heard of, Centerfold.
Okay.
You want me to sing it for you?
I mean, yes.
No. You want me to, because you're going to clip it and you're going to make me look like a horse's behind.
I'm not going to make you do anything. That's just the way you appear. I can't.
That's how you roll, baby. Oh, that was cold-hearted. Actually, other people have heard me sing little clips and like, yeah, Jim.
Yeah. I can't sing. So, anybody's better than this froggy voice. Here's another one that if you want to infer the center, as part of it, stuck in the middle with you.
There you go. That's just like a small inference away.
Yeah. For some reason, when I was thinking of this question, I came up with 2 answers, and I've already shared them kind of ahead of time. Like, here's kind of like what I was thinking. And one was, I will survive. That was sort of like the theme. And then the other one was let the bodies hit the floor. So if that gives you any sense of where my head is at right now, it's one of those 2 things, maybe as the theme songs for Identity Management Day. We'll be sitting down with Jeff Rich later this week to record an episode with him ahead of Identity Management Day. So, maybe we'll bring that up and see if we can get that into the agenda. Because we're doing a live podcast on Identity Management Day. I think we've got 30 minutes or so, and we still need to figure out what that show is going to be about. So, Jim, you and I got to get cracking here.
Yeah. Well, we'll be prepared.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up for this week. A couple reminders since we didn't get it out to in the very beginning, but conferences are coming up. So Jim, you and I will be in Berlin, and so will Heather. She'll be in Berlin as well for the EIC conference. We've got discount for that on our website, idacpodcast.com. I've got my flight booked. I'm going just for Berlin and then coming back. That's all I've got time for this year. But I'll be there for the entire week and looking forward to strolling the streets and talking with fellow like-minded individuals. And then we've got Identiverse in June. So we've got discount code for that as well, idacpodcast.com. Just scroll down. We will be doing a game show, I think, to kick off sort of the opening expo night, kind of expo hall night it's kind of like what we did last year. It will not be the Family Feud style show. It will be something different. Maybe majority rules, maybe something else. We'll see, but we're on that. And we'll be recording some episodes live from the expo hall floor. So please stop by and say hello. Grab a sticker. Jim's very proud of those stickers. As am I.
Have to be.
I'll have links in our show notes for people to connect with Heather and to Death and Digital Estate and see what else I take notes of. Digital Identity Podcast, so people can go out there and listen to Heather's fine work on that podcast, which is excellent. And we'll have links for us to connect on LinkedIn and, visit more of the show, idacpodcast.com. Like, subscribe, and that's it. We'll talk with everyone in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.